Hello everyone, it's Track, and in today's video I'm joined with my friend Awaken to debunk a versus video that YouTube recommended to me, which is Composite Goku versus Superman. This video contains several problematic and questionable arguments for both characters, which we'll be addressing in detail. But before we begin, I want to emphasize that no hate should be directed towards the creator. Just because we're debunking their video doesn't mean we should be treating people poorly. With that being said, let's begin.
In terms of attack potency, Goku is an absolute monster. In the previous video, we got Goku to Multiversal due to his punches clashing with Beerus and threatening to destroy the entire universe. This would include multiple dimensions, all of which are universal in size, meaning their attacks were going to destroy multiple universes. The problem with trying to get him higher than that with the official mainline story material is, despite going up in power drastically, you have to infinitely exceed Multiversal in order to get into the next tier, which he does not. So basically, even a billion times Multiversal is still Multiversal, not above it.
This is his first major error within the video, which is asserting that Universe 7 macrocosm only scales normal Goku to Multiversal. Without deeper knowledge on the Dragon Ball cosmology, such a claim appears valid, but in reality is fundamentally incorrect. While I could spend hours dissecting macrocosm scaling, I'll focus on one crucial element that elevates this feat far beyond Multiversal. Otherworld is stated to transcend all dimensions that cannot be perceived by the living world, meaning it surpasses even the super dimensions shown within the Broly movie, which in itself exists outside of dimensionality as a whole. Furthermore, Otherworld operates outside of the very concept of time and space, as confirmed by the super exciting guide, and is reinforced by the metaphysical separation from the living world. And the metaphysics examines foundational principles like existence, causality, and abstract notions like time and space. This aligns with direct statements from Goku and others emphasizing Otherworld's non-corporeal and timeless nature. Taken together, this irrefutably places Otherworld, the macrocosm, and Goku via his capacity to destroy it at Outerversal. So no, base Goku is not multiversal, but let's proceed anyway.
One of the strongest versions of Goku that we get is the Xenoverse version. In these games, Goku scales to Demigra, the demon god, who's capable of wiping out the entirety of history, which includes infinite timelines, with Goku even being able to stop his multiverse wiping attack with just his base physicals. This concept of infinite timelines is restated multiple times in both the Xenoverse games, as well as the Dragon Ball Heroes story, and history itself is considered to be the combination of all of these infinite timelines. So Demigra was threatening an infinite multiverse with his raw power alone. That gets him bare minimum to high complex multiversal, but probably more accurately to hyperversal, especially since the place Demigra is fighting Goku in exists outside of space-time, transcending time altogether, with this idea being reinforced by the fact that lower-level characters like Fu are also stated to transcend space-time. Since space-time in the context of the games would include the infinite timelines we spoke about, this would require at least a transcendence of the infinite multiverse. None of these characters are stated or shown to go beyond all dimensionality, so we can't get them to outerversal, but it's still ridiculously impressive nonetheless.
To quickly summarize Dragon Ball Heroes scaling, we can examine Super Dragon Ball Heroes World Mission. In this game, it's revealed that the game world and the real world where Beat resides is identical down to the same blade of grass, meaning they share the same cosmological structure. However, the real world transcends the game world, which will place the game world at least Outerversal via its otherworld transcendence. Since the real world surpasses the game world, it will inherently be at least one layer into Outerversal. Furthermore, because the real world contains its own otherworld mirroring the game world cosmology, this elevates the real world cosmology to being high Outerversal. The reasoning is as follows. The real world's living world is already Outerversal as it transcends the game world, and this otherworld transcends the living world to the same degree that the game world transcends its own living world. Given that nearly every major villain and heroes, including Demigra, can threaten or destroy the real world, this inherently places characters like Goku at high Outerversal. With that being said, I'll let Awaken take it from here.
There are multiple ways to go about getting current Superman to boundless. The most straightforward way is by using the Thought Robot or Cosmic Armor Superman. As I said in my last video, current Supes is an amalgamation of all of his previous mainline forms by virtue of the timelines all being merged into one, with each character inheriting the memories, experience, abilities, and even gear from previous forms. However, since Cosmic Armor Superman isn't technically an alternate timeline form, but rather that mainline Superman equipped with a special weapon, essentially, that may not necessarily apply. So let me clear up why that most certainly does. Current Superman is straight up stated by himself to be stronger than he's ever been, which would include every previous mainline form, including his Thoughtbot form. This means current Superman is simply above that version, so all of his scaling should apply to current Superman. Something else that I should clear up is why I use Superboy Prime scaling in my previous video. People are confused by that because they think that it's not Clark Kent, but Superboy Prime is Clark Kent, Kal-El, Superman from Earth Prime. So he is actually an alternate timeline version of Superman, not Superboy. That's why his scaling is fair to use here as well. But Thoughtbot Robot Superman's scaling is the one that's important here, so what does this mean for Kal-El? Thoughtbot Superman, otherwise known as Cosmic Armor Superman, is transcendental to Limbo, a realm which neither exists nor doesn't exist, and is where all of the forgotten characters reside, directly interacting with the comic book writers themselves. You could argue this alone gets Superman to boundless via transcending a realm which directly interacts with the real-world writers.
So in order to address his argument, we will utilize scholastic logic and reduce his argument to a syllogism. To understand what syllogisms are, Charles Copens explains the following in his book, A Brief Textbook of Logic and Mental Philosophy. All argumentation may be reduced to the categorical syllogism. A syllogism is an argument consisting of 3 propositions so connected that from the first 2, the third follows. In other words, a syllogism is an argument consisting of 2 premises that leads to a conclusion, which is the final proposition within a syllogism. Furthermore, we must talk about 2 distinct concepts of logic within scholastic logic known as formal logic and material logic. This will be extremely important in addressing this argument. Formal logic deals with the rules that must be assumed in order for man to reason. Put differently, it deals with the formalization or structure of syllogisms. Now, if the conclusion follows from the premises, then the syllogism is formally valid. That is to say that if the premises are true, then the conclusion necessarily follows from the preceding premises must also be true. On the other hand, material logic deals with the substance of the judgments or propositions within an argument. That is, even if the argument is formally valid, are the premises true? For example, consider the following arguments. Premise 1. All men are mortal. Premise 2. Mark is a man. Therefore, Mark is immortal. Right off the bat, this is formally valid since the conclusion follows from the premises. As Christian D. Wagner notes in his work, A Little Catechism on Logic, this is known as the first way conclusions can be drawn from premises. This may also be known as the first figure syllogism. Additionally, if we grant all judgments in this syllogism to be true, then this argument is materially valid as well. Thus, the syllogism would be both formally and materially valid, which are the requirements for a valid syllogism, as Christian D. Wagner explains in his book as well. Now this takes us to the problem with Sage's argument, which is reduced to a syllogism here. Looking at the structure, I will grant that this is formally valid. However, the substance of the premises has a couple of problems. For starters, premise 2 I deny, as it makes a problematic judgment that the limbo is not existence or non-existence. This statement is problematic as it violates a fundamental law of logic known as the law of excluded middle. The law of excluded middle states that there is nothing between being and not being. That is to say that there is nothing between existence and non-existence. A thing either exists or it does not exist. Thus, by making the proposition, Sage proposes a third option to such a self-evident dilemma that is logically impossible to occur in the first place. Additionally, definition 1 and premise 3 I deny, for just because a character is capable of interacting with real-world entities such as comic book writers doesn't follow that the character is boundless. We can simply denote that the character has some sort of hack such as fourth wall interaction and so on in order to interact with such entities. This is why this definition for boundless is simply incoherent. The boundless character is more accurately defined as a character that is conceptually superior to even high outer transfinite structures.
That Cosmic Armor Superman, aka Thoughtbot Superman, is capable of not only feeling the reader breathe on the comic, but is also shown to reach outside of the comic to the reader. This would be boundless by virtue of being able to interact with the real world and transcend his own fictional reality. But even if you don't like that logic, he's able to both reach out into the Overvoid and fight Mandrak in the Overvoid. The Overvoid is the literal page that the comic book is written on, which contains everything in DC and beyond, meaning that it's a part of the outside world. Being able to interact with the outside real world is also definitionally a requirement for boundless, as Superman is no longer bound by his fictional reality and instead interacting with and going into the one outside of it, ours. Interestingly, Superman is also 100% aware that he's a comic book character, but accepts this as he understands that he has a specific purpose assigned by the writers themselves. Another fairly easy way to get Superman to boundless is via upscaling from Mr. Mixie. We see in the world's funniest comic line that Mr. Mixie is capable of exiting their comic book world and coming into our real world. Mr. Mixie is a fifth-dimensional imp who's infinitely below the monitors, including Mandrak, who Superman is relative to. This would mean that Mr. Mixie is boundless and Superman upscales from there. This is a feat a lot of people just attribute to comic book silliness and try to explain away, but being able to exit his fictional reality in totality and move into our real world is definitionally boundless, and there's no real way around it.
On the contrary, there is a way around this, and you actually just buried yourself. The way around this is a simple reductio ad absurdum, also known as a proof by contradiction. A reductio ad absurdum is simply when you demonstrate that a proposition leads to an absurdity or contradiction, and this is what I will now do given your argument for Mr. Mixie being boundless. Firstly, let's establish 3 definitions necessary for this reductio, one of which is the definition for boundless I provided earlier, and the other 2 definitions should be obvious given the context of power scaling. Next, the first premise assumes the conclusion that Mr. Mixie is boundless, and given the definition I gave earlier, it follows to the second premise that to be boundless is to transcend the totality of dimensionality and be at the peak of transcendence. Premise 2 is true by definition given the definitions I provided, since boundless is at the highest tier possible that transcends other tiers that already transcend the totality of dimensionality, i.e. outerversal and high outerversal. However, premise 3 demonstrates the logical absurdity of affirming Mr. Mixie being boundless through Sage's own reasoning. Sage goes on to state that Mr. Mixie is a 5th-dimensional being infinitely inferior to the monitors, which would contradict Mr. Mixie being boundless because that entails that there is something external transcending Mixie who is a dimensional being. Thus, it follows to the conclusion that the proposition Mr. Mixie is boundless leads to a contradiction and is therefore false, since all contradictions are false. Lastly, premise 3 also benefits from the consistent ontological priors such as DC's depiction of 5D beings aligning with mathematical 5th dimensionality. This raises the credence of the proposition Mr. Mixie is a 5th dimensional being that's present in premise 3. Thus, we would be more propositionally justified in that belief. For those unfamiliar with propositional justification, you are justified in believing a proposition if and only if you possess sufficient epistemic reasons to support it. Therefore, if the established priors constitute sufficient epistemic reasons to accept the proposition Mr. Mixie is a 5th-dimensional being, then it follows that I am justified in believing that proposition.
The final way we'll get Big Blue to boundless is by using Clark scaling to the source. For context, the source is literally the source of all things, part of the overvoid, which is, again, the literal pages of the comic. The source being the source of all things in the DC cosmology, containing all of the fictional reality and being responsible for producing it, means that the source is also, in fact, boundless, as it transcends the fictional reality altogether.
So at this point, Sage is just using the same repetitive methods I already addressed, so we can just move on to speed.
In terms of speed, it's basically the same as Goku. Superman also transcends time altogether, fighting in realms like the Overvoid, which is beyond time. That gets him to irrelevant speed.
Let's grant that Superman transcends time and operates or fights in the Overvoid, a realm that transcends time. Even if true, this only proves a measurable speed and not a relevant speed. Here's the key distinction. A measurable speed is movement so fast it cannot be quantified due to being beyond linear time. This fits what you described perfectly because Superman is moving beyond time and thus there's no meaningful measurement to his speed. However, a relevant speed is speed completely beyond the notions of dimensionality in space-time. So given this definition, why should we be motivated to grant that Superman's speed feat presented here matches this definition?
Clark and Goku are not only in the same tier in terms of power output and durability, but also in terms of speed.
Actually, given all of these priors, I'm more propositionally justified in the belief that Goku is superior to Superman in all of these categories.
That being said, in this matchup, it's basically impossible to determine a winner. However, if I were to lean one side or the other, I'd lean towards the Man of Steel. The reason for this is the Mr. Mixie scaling. If Mr. Mixie is boundless and he's transcended by the monitors, with Mandrak, the Dark Monitor, being relative to Superman, you could argue that he's transcendental to one layer into boundless, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it's kind of just the way it is.
No, that's not the way it is. In fact, you were correct to say that it doesn't make sense because that line of reasoning would entail a contradiction in the boundless tier. Suppose that boundless is the highest tier possible in the context of fictional power scaling, obviously. A boundless being is that than which nothing greater can be conceived in the context of fictional power scaling, obviously. Now, if boundless is said to have a higher layer, then it does not transcend all things. And this premise would be pretty analytic because that means there's something external transcending the boundless tier and thus it's not really at the peak of transcendence or being. And so, it follows to the conclusion that positing a layer above boundless is to posit a contradiction in the term boundless.
I'd also just say that there's a lot more that you can poke at in Goku's boundless scaling, specifically the fact that the only thing that's really boundless is the fact that he's able to do a fusion with the audience, and this could just give him boundless energy transfer, but not necessarily boundless physicals, whereas Superman does just have boundless physicals. So if they were to box, Superman would just massively outscale him. But, you know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Goku has better arguments, maybe I highballed or lowballed one or the other, maybe I missed some things. Let me know what you think in the comments below. With all that said though, it was fun putting this video together, and I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. But until next time, have an awesome day.
Well, yeah, you are wrong because in conclusion, given everything established in the video, we have no motivation for granting any boundless scaling, even for Composite Superman whatsoever. And we don't affirm Goku is boundless either. The point still stands, however, that given so many priors and credence raisers we have for Outerversal and above Goku in comparison to Superman, we are more propositionally justified in the belief that Goku beats Superman than the contrary. Thank you all for watching, and God bless you all.